Raise the contentious issue of Uganda's decision not to renew its relationship with the United Nations Human Rights Office during President Yoweri Museveni's state visit in this country. The Ugandan head of state is visiting South Africa for the first time since 2011. The visit expected to lead to increased trade, but there are also a number of diplomatic issues that South Africa might possibly raise with Uganda. Newzroom Africa's Govin Whittles is standing by with the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Govin. And diplomacy, South Africa's approach to this is going to be an interesting one to watch. Why am I saying this? Simply because South Africa's foreign policy outlook is largely based on human rights, given where we come from as a country. Apartheid. Do you think that South Africa has the stomach to point out to Uganda that human rights abuses do not bode well for our relationship?
Well, that's what we'll find out, Oli. You're absolutely right. South Africa's international reputation is anchored on its dedication to enforcing human rights. There are a number of diplomacy issues which we expect South Africa to raise, but let's not preempt it. We're joined by Dr. Naledi Pandor. She's the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. Minister, let's begin with that issue. Uganda recently deciding not to renew their relationship with the United Nations Human Rights Office. Will South Africa raise that decision in today's state visit?
No, we're not the master of Uganda. They're a sovereign state, and they make their own decisions, just as we are a sovereign state and make our own decisions. We may discuss matters where we seek to influence each other, but in the end, it's the country that decides.
Does South Africa have any responsibility to do so, considering the harsh criticism leveled against the head of state, Yoweri Museveni, particularly after his sixth-term victory, during which, in his campaign, he was said to have made a number of homophobic remarks?
Well, we wouldn't make homophobic remarks in South Africa. This is our standard. And as I say, we hope other countries would draw on the universal human rights framework and attach to it. But South Africa is not a nanny. We can't, accept responsibility for, trying to persuade other countries to go this way or another way. What we do is point out the benefit of the enjoyment of freedoms and human rights. We do this in a range of fora. We often have this discussion in the EU, where we point out the value South Africa attaches and the benefits we derive from having a human rights framework that the government both supports and promotes. This is something we have pride in as the South African people and government. And of course we share that information with other countries. But in the end, it will be their decision as to how they conduct themselves. In the context of SADC, we have very clear rules as to how one becomes a member of SADC. And countries that have sought to become members, they don't meet the criteria in the framework, such as a justiciable Bill of Rights, courts that operate independently and so on, they would not be admitted to that body. So there are rules that you might have in a particular region. Other regions have different rules. So we have to abide, by what exists, but work with each other to persuade. It doesn't mean what we do is the perfect thing, nor what someone else does is absolutely wrong.
Let's talk about the other regions. The Great Lakes region has had a number of interesting developments over recent weeks, particularly as the M23 rebel group seems to be quite active in the DRC. South Africa, having had a historical interest in maintaining peace in the DRC, but also having good relations with Uganda, and the relations with Rwanda at this point are questionable. What role do you think Uganda can play in that conflict and South Africa's vision for what needs to happen?
Well, President Museveni, as a member of the East African community, is already playing a role in helping the DRC and Rwanda to resolve this current tension between the two countries. As you know, the East African community decided to deploy a force to eastern DRC to help the DRC to repel these M23 rebels, as well as other groupings that Uganda, for example, regards as a threat to their own stability and security. So President Museveni very much involved. In fact, he sent a high-level representative to the meeting President Ramaphosa hosted at the African Union, which was focused on the DRC-Rwanda challenge. We had both heads of state of DRC and Rwanda addressing the meeting, as well as President Lorenzo of Angola, who has been assigned to serve somewhat as a mediator between the two. So he gave us a report on the decisions that have been taken in a meeting of the Great Lakes region and the East African community. And we feel that we will begin to see some progress. But we all have to keep a close eye on what's happening in the eastern DRC. We've got SADC forces deployed there. We have South African troops and police. So we're keeping a very close eye on developments. And I will be going to the DRC myself in the next few weeks.
What will you be doing there?
I will be participating in the meeting of the ministers of SADC. We have decided that we should have an organ meeting there in preparation for the summit later this year, and that we need to get from the DRC themselves a direct report on what is happening in the eastern DRC.
Moving away from Uganda, just briefly, elections have taken place in Nigeria. There were widespread delays across the country due to the electronic voting system. What does South Africa make of how they've happened and the importance of these elections?
Well, it's a huge election, and so one does anticipate that there would be challenges. I think from reports we've seen, Nigeria has done as much as it can to have an efficient election. The glitches have been most worrying. The fact that some voting stations couldn't open and then voting continued late into the next day. This doesn't always augur well for the assessment of the freeness and fairness of the election. But I think we all understand that when you're dealing with 90 million voters or so, you do face challenges of efficiency. And largely, the election was peaceful. There were some instances of violence in the lead-up to the election, but the election day appears to have proceeded smoothly. I just hope that the Electoral Commission is able to conclude the counting and at least give assurance that they are going to be able to deliver results very soon.
All right, thank you so much. That's the Minister of International Relations, Dr. Naledi Pandor, speaking to us just ahead of the arrival of President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda. He's expected here within the hour and will be received by the President as well as a senior delegation of ministers. We'll bring that to you live as soon as it happens. But for now, it's back to you.